So, in Breaking Bad, our hero, Heisenberg, in his junior days, decides he needs to break into a building to steal some stuff.
So why don't we just steal it ourselves? Yeah? How are we gonna do that? With this.
And what better way to do that than by cutting through the lock using thermite?
Stand back.
Jesus.
Which, according to Heisenberg, could destroy the biggest field gun in history.
In World War II, the Germans had an artillery piece. It's the biggest in the world, called the Gustav gun.
Completed in 1942, the Gustav weighed over 1,400 tons. The gun was so big that the only way to move it was on its own dedicated railway.
It took 25 trains to bring all the equipment, all the installations of the Schwere Gustav.
In all, it took 90 days to prepare the gun for firing.
The Gustav was capable of firing a 7-ton shell and hitting a target accurately 23 miles away.
The gun's 5.5-ton shells had a range of over 24 miles.
I mean, you could drop bombs on it every day for a month without ever disabling it.
And because of its dimensions, of course, it's very vulnerable to air attacks.
And it was only used once against the Soviet city of Sebastopol.
It could fire 48 shots and then its barrel was worn out completely. Was the Schwere Gustav a successful weapon? In the end, you have to answer no.
But you drop a commando, one man, with just a bag of this.
It needs enormous maintenance to keep it in working order.
And he could melt right through 4 inches of solid steel and destroy that gun forever. Huh?
And to really put the cherry on the cake, he makes it out of a Etch-a-Sketch.
So why don't we just steal it ourselves? Yeah? How are we gonna do that? With this.
Well, what do you think? Is that badass or bullshit? Can you really make a little bag of thermite out of an Etch-a-Sketch, or several of them, that would cut through a lock like this? Well, being a bit of a high-energy reactions expert, I figured I'd take a look at this, because I am the one who checks. Right, so let's start with the basics. What the hell is Heisenberg getting out of this generic Etch-a-Sketch? Well, that's simple. Aluminium powder, which is the high-energy component of thermite. The other component is typically iron oxide, which is essentially rust. Now, thermite's a bit of an odd one for high-energy compounds in that while it generates lots of heat, it doesn't actually explode. Burning thermite never goes bang. While most explosions from gunpowder or hydrogen-oxygen burns or from nitroglycerin to nukes are caused by the expansion of gases. They are barometric explosions. Yeah, typically about half of the energy from nukes goes into that overpressure, which can quite happily do things like crush a destroyer like it was a sardine can.
Virtually the entire starboard side of the standard DLG-16 deckhouse between the O2 and O4 levels is blown in under 10 psi overpressure. Failure appears to have been caused by rupture of the deck-level welds of the vertical web frame.
Well, actually, believe it or not, this was done by a regular explosion, albeit 500 tons of TNT in the humorously named Sailor Hat test, which was just a sort of benchmark nuclear test.
Blast injuries to exposed personnel, represented by this dummy, is usually severe over 3 psi. Here it was 6 psi.
Yeah, a good pressure wave can really sting, even if it is done by 500 tons of regular explosive. This, on the other hand, was done by a pressure wave from a nuke. So yeah, a pressure wave can really hurt. But thermite really doesn't generate one because it can only heat the gas in direct contact with it, which is basically none. That's of course, unless like Mythbusters, you pour the stuff onto ice. At which point you get a metal water explosion, but that's kind of a different story. But what happens when thermite really gets going is it gets hot, really, really hot. But just to get it going is actually not that easy, because you've got to at least get up to the melting point of aluminium. Okay, so that's aluminium. And one of the interesting things about aluminium is it's actually a really very reactive metal. It's just it forms this oxide skin on the surface, which means that it's really quite hard to get it to react with anything. Even if I melt it, I'm just going to hold it with a pair of pliers like this and try and melt it. And so it'll melt about 650. Hopefully you get a pretty decent view of this. But you'll see that when it does melt, the oxide skin is actually good enough that I should be able to hold it by the oxide skin. It's fairly, oh there we go, he's molten. Which is about 600 degrees Celsius or so. That's a glowing, dull red heat, and that's even before it will start. Which is why people, when they want to set off thermite, will typically use something like burning magnesium just to get it going. Because honestly, Heisenberg here would probably spend the best part of a minute trying to set this stuff off with a blowtorch. However, once it does get going, you turn the aluminium powder and iron oxide into aluminium oxide and iron, and a lot of energy. Heat. Enough to put the burn temperature of this stuff up to about half the temperature of the surface of the sun. Now, in this case, Heisenberg uses his Etch-a-Sketch ripoff for his aluminium powder. Although quite why he does that, I'm not quite sure, because in America, you can just order aluminium powder online by the kilogram, which is not surprising in a country where you have the freedom to own some pretty heavy-duty firepower. And honestly, it takes a damn sight more skill and knowledge to turn aluminium powder into something dangerous than a gun. Indeed, even in England, where there are all these incredibly prudish laws about people being able to own high-energy chemicals, you can still buy the stuff on eBay, because thermite still has many legal and civilian uses. So yeah, the first sin is why are you getting your chemicals from a kid's toy when they're readily available all over the place? Then of course, let's take a look at our Etch-a-Sketch. And I've got to be honest, that doesn't look much like aluminium powder to me. Oh, those are the balls inside the Etch-a-Sketch. Doesn't look much like aluminium powder to me. Looks more like polystyrene with aluminium powder on top. But we will see. And even at that, when you cut it open, you find there's only 20 or so grams of aluminium in there. What are we at? 24 grams, that's a lot more than I expected. It's 25 grams, and those balls may or may not be aluminium, I'm not sure. So that is the inside of the Etch-a-Sketch. And that's enough to maybe make 80 or so grams of thermite. That's about the same weight as a couple of chocolate bars, which is maybe about the same size bag as Heisenberg has here.
And he could melt right through 4 inches of solid steel and destroy that gun forever. Jeez.
Now at this point, I'm instantly skeptical, just on some ballpark feelings. I mean, let's make some rough assumptions that all substances take about the same energy to heat them up 1 degree. So they all have the same heat capacity. So to melt iron, you have to heat it up about 1000 degrees. So 1 gram of thermite will melt about 1 gram of iron. So 80 grams of thermite will melt about 80 grams of iron, which, given that iron's pretty dense stuff, is only about 10 milliliters of iron. And that's assuming that all of the energy goes into this melting iron, and none of it goes into heating up the surroundings, which is a pretty optimistic scenario. Now, even at this point, I have grave doubts about all that lumpy stuff in the Etch-a-Sketch, whether it's actually aluminium. And that's actually really important, because for thermite to work efficiently, you have to know how much aluminium there is and how much iron oxide there is. If you only have half the amount of aluminium powder that you think you're putting in, and the rest is, say, some plastic buffer or something, well, first of all, you can only at best generate about half the amount of energy that you would have otherwise generated. And secondly, the thermite, you just added some buffer in there, which will also absorb the heat but not generate any of its own. So I made up a bunch of thermites with a range of compositions, going on the basis maybe as small a fraction as 1/3 of this silvery stuff was actually aluminium. And then you try and set them off.
Etch-a-Sketch, and it's now my firm belief that this one, which is the correct ratio, will actually be the best, although it might not burn up quite as easily. So let's see what happens. This is thermite made from an Etch-a-Sketch. That's weird. Okay, he's remarkably reluctant to go. Let's try number 2. There's also, oh, it is. It's bloody. It's polystyrene. I knew it. Okay. Try number 3. Three doesn't do anything. Let's go for one more, and then I'll show you what some real thermite looks like. Okay, that's the next one. Yeah, it just coats. It just melts up instantly. The polystyrene. I can smell it now. That sooty flame. That's just polystyrene burning. That's pathetic. I've been lied to. Right, now, let me show you what real thermite looks like. Now for this I might need the safety screen, so the face shield and the glove. Probably not, usually you set the stuff off without too much trouble. There we go. I did need the safety shield. Yeah. And you see that sooty flame? That's the polystyrene burning.
So at this point, I think we can safely call this I made thermite from an Etch-a-Sketch thing busted. There is zero chance that you want to cut through a lock like this, let alone disable the Gustav gun. But what if all that stuff in this Etch-a-Sketch was actually aluminium? Could I have cut through a lock with it then? How would about 80 grams or so of thermite have fared against a lock? Well, I didn't have a lock to melt, so I decided to go for something a little different. I went for a hard drive that I wanted to decommission. Now, a hard drive is essentially an aluminium block, and aluminium melts a lot lower than steel. So let's see how 80 grams of thermite fares against a hard drive.
PCB burns well. But honestly, there's almost no melt through on the on the actual disc. That's crazy. Well, I believe that to cool down now.
Yep, as depressing as it was, my 80 grams of thermite failed to make any significant burn through on the hard drive, and honestly I was kind of surprised about that. But maybe that's because quite a lot of the thermite actually went onto a printed circuit board, and once that's carbonized it probably makes a pretty good insulator until this molten stuff has cooled down. Either way, it seems that our heroes would have been outrageously lucky to have actually burnt through a lock using this Etch-a-Sketch thermite. Still, credit where it's due. Compared to MacGyver's comically inaccurate thermite blowtorch,
I can open it for you. Nobody get hurt.
With what, your teeth?
Thermite torch.
Made out of what?
That bicycle. And some of the equipment you got over there, and add a little iron rust, and I'll cut through that door like a hot knife through butter.
made from filing down a bike.
A racing bike's made out of magnesium. Light, strong, and flammable. When you file it down to a powder,
and a few grams of rust,
add some ferric oxide, your rusted iron,
to make a blowtorch.
Turn an expensive bike into a torch
that would cut through a car. Hell, Heisenberg's scientific accuracy seems like it needs a Nobel Prize. Or maybe just another one.